you have people that goes to university that will still ask you these questions. Do you have cars? Are you lactose? And then traveling through those like seriously.
The whites in this country, that Africans, they don't have any industry. They don't have, people are still living in huts and that whole.
And I had an experience with a Jamaican woman who did not, at work, that did not identify herself as Black at all, and was offended when she was identified, or people would identify her or call her a Black woman. And she'd quickly correct them, say that she's Jamaican.
I've seen it with places I've worked and other places that there's a clique between the people from the Caribbean, African Americans. They're operating different and they don't really come together. I feel like the Africans have the same attitude here in this country. They think that they're superior than the other ones. I think the Africans feel like they are from the motherland. They are the real Black. They are the real Black. They haven't been contaminated by the man or whatever. All these others have other issues.
American is that people that are self-centered about them, you know. The world revolves around America, is the powerful nation. Everybody wants that American dreams. So they eat, you know.
From what I've seen anyway, you know, a Caribbean woman is more desirable for relationship wise, and I still see that even in, you know, all parts of the United States.
To accept who we are and to not take what the world think about us being the truth about us.
Hello, my name is Amy, and I'm here with my friend Jace and Tiffany, and we're going to talk about Africans versus African Americans versus Caribbean Americans and all the drama, stereotypes, and issues surrounding that. That's an issue that's been on my mind for quite a while. And I want to start with a little story actually on how we all met and how this thought started. We all met in South Africa. We were in the hotel room of Tiffany, and we were all, you know, sitting around just talking. I showed up. Jace was already there. And at some point, we were having just a general discussion. And right away, I felt comfortable with everyone. And at some point, I asked her, and I'm not quite sure what the question was, but I felt comfortable enough to ask Jace, and it had something to do with.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure what it had to do with, but what sparked this discussion was when Jace introduced herself. She said she was from Gabon, and she said something like, "You know where the," and I said, "Oh yes," and she said, "Oh, you know where that is," and I was kind of like taken back, like, she must think us Americans don't know anything about Africa. Now, I didn't say that. That's what I was thinking in my mind. So that's where we are today. We're going to talk about stereotypes, what we think about each other, and how that comes about. But this is all in the spirit of curiosity and friendship. So
I didn't know where Gabon was, so.
Again, most people don't know where is Gabon. And I understand how you felt, Amy, but it had even nothing to do with you being American. I will tell everybody, like, I'm like, with Gabon, they're like, are you from Gabon? South Africa? Like, no, Gabon. No one knows where that tiny country is. So I always go like, do you know where's Gabon? Do you know where that is? Like,
was your president Nelson Mandela?
That's a question that I have all the time. Do you know Nelson Mandela? No, I'm from Gabon, not South Africa.
So start out the conversation, let's talk about identity and what each of us identify as. So I guess I will start because I actually am second generation from the Caribbean. My parents were born, both my parents and I were born in this country, but grandparents on all sides came from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, Trinidad, and Barbados. So, but I don't, I'm actually, for me, it's kind of hard to answer that question because I think I really identify as African American because almost all the communities I grew up in and lived in were mainly African American communities. But I do realize in some respects, some things culturally or some mindsets I think I've taken from the Caribbean side. So I'm somewhere in between. But if I had to identify myself, I would probably identify as African American, even though, like I said, there is a Caribbean component to that.
Right.
So ladies, let's
Tiffany?
I guess I would identify myself as Black African American. With maybe like the emphasis on the Black part. Black African American. I recognize, our lineage, in terms of being African, right? But also, my grandparents on both sides, were part of that great migration from the South. So my grandparents on my mother's side, or great grandparents from my mother's side, come up through Tennessee and Kentucky, and then on my father's side, Alabama and Mississippi. So, um, I consider I identify as a Black woman, or Black African American woman.
Right. My answer will be quick. I identify as African. And that's really it's true that I identify as a Black person in general. But the first thing that comes in mind when somebody asks me today, and it has not always been the case, that's something that I've been really recent within the last 15 years. Before that, it was a little bit more complicated. When somebody would ask me, I was like, I didn't know what to say because I'm also a French national. And I was like, I didn't know which answer. But right now, I'm really rooted. And when somebody asks me, my first answer will be, I'm African. Yeah.
So the nationalist part doesn't play too much of a role.
Well, it's true that then now, if somebody just asks me generally, it's not somebody that I know, I would just say African. But now, if the person wants to know more, of course, if Africa, not being a country, being a continent, there's a lot of countries in it. And I'm from Gabon. But I'm one of these Pan Africanists that really want Africa to be reunited and be one powerful nation. So I really identify myself as being African. It doesn't matter wherever I go, Senegal, South Africa, I feel like I'm at home. I'm in Africa. So this is home for me. So sometimes I even have a fight with the people from local. But like I was in Cote d'Ivoire and I'm like, I'm home. Yo, no, you Gabonese. No, I'm from Africa. This is my home. Like it or not.
I guess
Yeah.
that's the other question is um, how do how have we experienced others identifying us, right? Because
Yeah.
that happens too. You get identified, or labeled, maybe labeled is the word, as whatever from other people.
Okay, well, with each of those identities, I think there's always stereotypes attached to these things. So let's talk a little bit about stereotypes. But when my idea of stereotypes, they, they're not, may not necessarily be true, or a lot of times they're not true, but they're
Yeah.
kind of ideas that you have about people. So for example, I think, let me see. So stereotypes, okay, so I identify as African American. So I will say the stereotypes that I think I have, or let's say that I have about the African Americans. I think the stereotype is that we're complainers. um, we don't we don't have a drive. We don't like to travel. We're kind of into ourselves.
Yes. If I talk for myself as an African American, I didn't know a lot of American, but the perception that I had from them is that people that are self-centered about them, the world revolve around America is the powerful nation. Everybody want that American dreams. So they eat,
Mhm.
and they don't venture so much outside. A bit what you were saying actually
Mhm.
at the end, yeah. So that's the idea I had of American, a little bit like looking down at the other people, because they are the powerful nation. And for the Caribbean, please don't come at me. That's my experience. It's like they've just been mean. Like they've been uh, oh my goodness, I had just such a bad experience. The
When you
only
say
person
mean, is there a particular, how does the
they
meanness
just
present
the
itself?
fact that even worse than the American,
Mhm.
Caribbean think that they're better than all the blacks. They don't even want to identify as blacks. I mean, I shouldn't say there because then I generalize, but the people that have been around. I grew up in France, I worked there, and in my office, I worked with so many Caribbean, and it was the same story. They wouldn't want to identify as black. They're Caribbean, they're Martinican, they're French, but they're like the special, it's, like you say,
Special
oh,
category.
the special category.
I mean,
Um,
I get where you're coming from because I had mentioned it before to you about a woman that I had worked with, and because I'm from a small city in the Midwest, I don't have a lot of exposure to you know different different ethnicities, and races and things like that, in this area. I mean, there's a lot. It's basically black and white, and I had an experience with a Jamaican woman who did not at work that did not identify herself as black at all and was offended when she was identified or people would identify her or call her a black woman. And she'd quickly correct them, saying that she's Jamaican. Now, that's just one person. It's hard for me. I'm curious about this stereotype because the stereotype of Caribbeans seeing themselves as exclusive, Caribbeans seeing themselves as a different category and not black. Caribbean, I'm interested in the stereotype of maybe the stereotype of Caribbeans seeing themselves as better than,
the
black
other black.
people, better than
Yeah.
African people, or what have you. But that was just one experience that I had with one individual, and so it's hard for me to um weigh in,
Yeah.
like we're talking about generalizing. It's hard for
Yeah.
me to weigh in on my thoughts on that because I don't have enough experience. You definitely have more experience, Jace, than I have in terms of engagement, with Caribbean people and Amy, but
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I think stereotypes are one of those things that developed even if you've never met any whoever you're stereotyping
True.
about.
It is
Uh,
true.
yeah,
Yeah. It is
so,
true. Yeah.
but the thing about it's interesting. Well, I think that's why I really wanted to hear what, like I said, I don't remember that question I put out to Jace, but I kind of feel like, and I agree with, because I can see even my own family, that Caribbeans, they do have a superiority attitude. But now I'm going to say my stereotypes, but I feel like everybody that is not African American does not want to associate themselves with African Americans. So the thing about the Korean, I feel like the Africans have the same attitude here in this country, that they do not want to be associated with American blacks.
Ah,
So any
Really?
black people from anywhere in the diaspora, I feel like when they come to the US, they do not want to be associated with American blacks. They want to let you right away. They're African, they're from the Caribbean, they're from South America, wherever, but they're quick to let you know they are not native, American.
so is the stereotype then, Amy, really is one of the main stereotypes really about Black Americans? Is that Black Americans are less than other Blacks, Africans, Caribbeans around the world?
Yeah, I think that's, the perception about that. But then, like I said, my stereotypes about the Caribbean, people from the Caribbean and Africans, that they think that they're superior than the other ones. I think the
Really?
Africans feel like they are from the motherland. They are the real they are the real black. They haven't been contaminated by the man or whatever. Where all you others have other issues. Like, I never really thought about how Africans feel about the ones from the Caribbean, but I think everybody's attitude towards African Americans I feel like that way. But I feel like
Guys,
Africans have a superiority attitude, because I even think of my grandmother. Not only did she not want to associate with being Black American, but also she would say she's British. She will say she was British
even
before,
in yes,
when she was here. And she had the nerve. I remember even her saying at one point that we were somehow related to the royal family. I'm like,
you know,
some kind of illegitimate children or something.
You
It's
can't
like,
get any further than that.
so they do, so I feel like they do have, I can speak firsthand within my family, they have a superiority attitude. And I've seen it with places I've worked and other places, that there's a clique between the people from the Caribbean, African Americans. They're operating different and they don't really come together on a lot of issues. They really feel like that's my stereotype about
yeah.
that. But Americans, but I said, like, another stereotype I'm thinking American blacks have about Africans, that they're all living in huts out
That's what
in the bush,
that's American.
out
That's
in the
the
bush
Ontario bomb.
somewhere,
Yeah.
because they've taken on the attitude of the whites in this country, that Africans, they don't have any industry, they don't have, people are still living in huts,
Yeah.
and that whole thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
It's really interesting, both of you, when you were saying that you think that the stereotype that like the Caribbeans and the African have toward the African American is shocking for me. I never heard it. Because for me, African people look up to African American. Maybe not today. Maybe that attitude that you see today as even me being saying I'm African. I've told you at the beginning about the rejection. Because for me, when I see black people, period. I see my sisters. I don't see African American, I don't see Caribbean. But because I've been rejected so much as an African, because as you say, the
mhm.
image of African people are like in a, living in a, we don't have any industry. Even being an adult at university, you have people that goes to university that will still ask you these questions. Do you have cars? Are you lactose? And then traveling through those, like seriously, in 2000, I don't know, it was crazy. So that actually like frustrated a lot of African. I can't just talk for the African. So
Mhm.
then we like retaliate. You don't want us? You think that we're less than you? Well, I'm African, period. Because before, because of what the world saw, I didn't want to be associated to African either, although I'm an African. I grew up in France and I'm a French citizen. So when people ask me what I am, I was trying to go around it because it was so shameful to be associated to being African. And
Mhm.
the more I grew up, we decided to go back to Africa to learn, to be reverted to the African culture. And this is when we took a stand of really learning to love who we are,
Mhm.
to accept who we are, and to not take what the world think about us being the truth about us. You
Mhm.
know, and I think that's what you see a lot because I don't believe that Africans have that hateful for other Black people. They don't think they're better. But as they've been so much shunned and looked down at, we know now rising and awakening about our power and who we are, and then we're now taking a stand. I
Mhm.
think that's what it is for us. But for
Mhm.
the Caribbean, several of them told me in the family when they have those meetings, they tell the children not to marry with Black people,
Mhm.
and certainly not African, but to marry white people. So, with time, you clean
The light
the
and the
line.
yeah.
Yes. And have you heard that, Amy?
Yes,
Oh
And that
yes.
was shocking to me.
yes.
One told me I can't go out with black people or African people. I'm like, but what are you? Aren't you black?
I'm curious though, Jace. I'm sorry. I'm curious about why that is. Um, is that like a way of protecting themselves or making themselves where they are accepted? Um, does it benefit them, right? You know what I mean? Like, what is the benefit of that?
100%. Because the closer you are from, the closer you are to the white people, the better you are.
Well, let me ask you a question because this is kind of diverting to one of the later questions I wanted to ask about the generational issue. What are the ages of these people? Do you think are these discussions coming from people our age, or are the young people still
Well,
spouting these things?
that was back when I was in my 20s,
Mm-hmm.
25, etc. Right? I would believe and I do hope that today these people are now our generation, they know better. Because I think there's a lot more understanding between the blacks. We still not click together completely. We still have our differences, but I think there's a better understanding as being a black person. What is it being a black person? Because I've asked that question to my daughter, who is 26, and I asked her, we are going to have that conversation with my friend. What
Mm-hmm.
do you think? How is it happening with you and your friend? Because she has a lot of black friends from all over.
Mm-hmm.
Do you identify as, blacks? Do you identify as different, wherever you come from? She's like, Mom, for us it's more about culture. We black British. It's true that Caribbean are Caribbean, African and African, African American are African American, but what is more important that we come together as black
Mhm.
British, you know so it's more about the culture. And she told me it's not a big deal for us. They don't have the all get along. I see a friend coming here and they're from the Caribbean. A few of them are Jamaican,
Mm-hmm.
and I never seen any problem with them. But
Mhm.
I think it's better today. What I'm really referring to, it's in the past. And since I haven't been around really Caribbean except my kids friends,
Mm-hmm.
but of our age I don't know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm a bit of a, let me preface this with, I'm a bit of a pessimist, I guess. Uh,
Okay.
I don't know whether it's changed. I don't know whether it's changed that much as far as, because I think colorism and that whole thing is still alive and kicking. Um,
For
yeah,
sure.
I'm not sure about that. I know, for example, I live in New York City in a very Latin neighborhood. And that whole thing about marrying, don't be marrying no dark,
Mhm.
telling the girls, don't be bringing home no black Afro Latin or no dark ones. They still for sure have that. Let's lighten up the family. Um, I don't see it so pronounced in the African American community, but I think it's still there, but it's not as in your face as like the Latin community. Latin community has no problem with expressing that. I think with African Americans, it's sort of underlining. So I don't know whether it's I don't know. I don't know whether it's changed that much with the younger people. I would hope so, but
You
I
know, it's funny. It's funny. I don't know if I think I don't know. I think it has changed a lot, but um, there are nuances to everything. You know, like when I think about like relationships in terms of like black women, black African American women, and their prospects for relationships and identifying as black African American women, um, and looking like a black African American woman, whatever that looks like, um, is still very strong today as far as like relationships go. You were talking about, you know, lightening the line or you know, just dating or having relationships with people who are lighter skinned or what have you. Um, I think that's still very, very, very common, even today. Like you said, where you live, I think that's true even in the Midwest and the South, that there's this big push toward, you know, um, they, I, from what I've seen anyway, you know, a Caribbean woman is more um, desirable for um, relationship wise, and I still see that even in, you know, all parts of the United States. If you identify as Caribbean or if you identify as exotic, um, so I guess identity in terms of like, you know, whether you're African American is more about the aesthetics and what do you look like. Like, do you look like Caribbean? Do you look like Latinx? Do you look like, or do you just look like a black woman or a black person?
I do see some changes coming up. We had Obama, who is mixed race with a very dark Michelle Obama. That was so beautiful to see. All right. I
mhm.
see a lot more of the young generation of men and women wanting to really accept who they are and looking. I don't know. I do hope so. I'm a optimist.
Optimist.
I'm
I'm a,
optimistic too. I
I'm a,
think I'm optimistic, but that it's
yeah.
not that I see I and I do see that, you know, how we identify, you know, doesn't isn't a negative, you know, more and more. I see that, you know, as a positive. People are proud of their identity, how they identify, you know, and they're out with it. And I think it's great. But in terms of the stereotypes, and I don't want to get too far off with the colorism, but
Yeah.
as far as the stereotypes to go, I agree with you, Amy, and with regard to Black African Americans, that the stereotype persists, and I mean, it persists today. You know, um, unambitious, entitled, you know, complainers. You know,
I'm
looking
ambitious.
for
This
a
is
handout.
I never heard that. I never, you are actually opening my eyes. I know about, and it's not even, honestly, the stereotype that I had personally, it was not even about you being African American. It's about Americans in
Mhm.
general. The attitude of American being like better than everyone, that the first powerful nation. because that's the marketing that America does in the world, right? They're the most powerful nation in history. And you are American. So whether you African American or not, or whatever
Mm-hmm.
follows the, and then American, that's what we had. So I never had or thought that you are less than or an ambition. Never.
Yeah.
People will look at American as actually people that. Where do you take that stereotype? Where did you hear it, by the way? Is it something that everywhere? I need to go on the internet. I live under a rock, guys. I'm not aware. I never
Yeah,
heard
I
that.
don't know. I don't know where it's. Yeah,
Well,
that's a
we
good.
know where it stems from.
It's
But
just,
we're not.
I don't know. I just feel like it's just always been. I don't know where I can point you in the thing. But let me ask you, Chase, about the whole thing with Europe and or just let's just do England where you're living at now as far as um do you see the three groups coming together? Because you say now things, all right, even with your daughter, when she says things are changed, is she interacting with a lot of Caribbean and African Americans, blacks?
There's not a lot of African American here, to be honest with you. But like
Uh-huh.
black people, like she's in where she before she never had any black friend, to be honest. In a
Mhm.
school where we live, there's not a lot of black
Black
people.
people.
So then she joined a church in London, and all the blacks come together in that church. So there could be American, Caribbean, and I think that's a very good point that you just making me think of that. They are Christians, and that specific church, I think, is because they are Christian that they like accepting of each other over their faith.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that, because honestly, I haven't seen that happening outside, like
Mhm.
the Caribbean, the American, and the African coming together. No, no, they're very much a bridge
Yeah,
between
I was
us.
going to say here, I don't see that at all. And I'm in a major city. I don't see Africans by themselves, Caribbean by themselves, the Africans. They're not coming together. I can't think of anything where they're really coming together
Yeah,
as a group for.
there's
And is that because of identity, or is that because of customs, cultures, and traditions? Like, like you have certain groups of people that share a culture, like they share a traditions that they passed on. Like you were even talking about, Amy, about your family, um, which if I were in your community, if say I was in a community of Caribbean people, I would not be able to relate necessarily to that particular type of culture, right? So is it that we are there's this fragmentation as a result of culture or identity? Because
Well,
you know what I
I
mean? Like,
I think that's the question. I think that we're discussing because I don't know. I don't
I,
know because when I think about, I don't know, it's very complicated and some of it may have to do with discrimination, human. I think there's some factors of that cultural, but then when I think at the white majority in this country, I would think they may be Italian, Scandinavian, whatever. They got different cultures or whatever, but they come together on a lot of things that I don't see we as African American, Caribbean Americans coming together. Now, whether that's probably can be a discussion in of itself on why that's not happening. So I think culture does, play a factor, but I'm not sure what that.
I'm thinking that it's culture, and it's probably race culture, because like you were saying about, I live in a small city and predominantly white, you know definitely predominantly white county, and where like Greeks, Italians, Irish, come together, there's even though they have their own nuanced culture, right? There's still this sense of whiteness, right? There's an idea that there's a commonality in the States anyway. There's a commonality in whiteness, like there's a commonality, I think, in blackness, but you know what I mean? Like there's a thick thread because of how this country is racially and the racial history of the country, that's what ties like us together. You know what I mean? Is the race piece as opposed to the ethnicity piece or the cultural piece. Those pieces seem to be kind of fragmented, but the racial piece, I see all of us as, I think we all see ourselves, even though I know that, you know, we talk about the Caribbean and how they see themselves, and Africans who, you know, immigrant Africans who see them, how they see themselves in comparison to, you know, African American. But do you think, like, when it comes down to it, do we all really do still share that common thread in terms of race in this, in America? We may do we I don't know if maybe we don't come together. I don't know exactly how to frame it, but isn't there a common thread for all Black people in America because of race?
Yeah, I don't know what you. Yeah.
They don't. So the Caribbean people or African immigrant African people who are, do they not see themselves, or in your experience, have you felt that they don't see themselves as Black at all? That they don't connect, as in this country it's hard to separate yourself from race, Black.
Yeah, I don't know, because you know what? When I'm thinking my you know, I've never really asked. So I don't know. I don't know how it could not be. But the ones that want to disassociate, the Caribbean ones that want to disassociate themselves with Black Americans, I don't know whether they do see themselves as not being Black.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was wondering about, because, like, you know, we know race is a social construct. We know the history of this country, you know, and when it comes, because it came to mind because of what you just said about other people who have assimilated to whiteness, you know what I mean, in this country, mm-hmm. and how they can come together, right? It's usually along the lines of race in this country. Mm-hmm. You know, you're either assimilated to whiteness or you're identified and, you know, as Black. You know what I mean? So even though there's nuances within the culture, if outside of the culture, like, for example, if I have people in my community that identify as Caribbean or, you know, immigrant African, Native African, we will all see ourselves as Black in relation to the white community. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? It's hard to separate the relationship between race in this mm-hmm. country. Like I might see myself as different within the Black community and all the ethnicities within the Black community, but outside of that community, we all Black people, right? And because of the history of this country, right? So I don't know if that's just a struggle that we have internally. If that's like it's just an internal issue,
right? Yeah.
Or if it's broader than that, because I don't know if it's broader than internally. I don't know.
Well, I guess that's a question we can put out to the audience and whoever is listening here is,
Exactly.
yeah, please comment where you stand on this issue. What do you identify as? Do you see all Black people as one or not? Or, yeah, comment. Please comment.
I can't comment on that because I don't know really how it is in America. But since the Black Lives Matters, everything becoming so public about all the death and how the police brutality
Mhm.
against Black people, do you think that this like somehow brought the Black people together?
My sense, that's why I wanted to have this conversation, is I have a sense that these three groups are not, they really, for
Yeah, tell me
whatever
when you feel
reason, are
like. Mhm.
not, that they really are operating in three different orbits.
Mm,
And I don't
mm.
really see, my sense is they're not coming together on anything really.
And do you think that in terms of a particular generation, or do you think that it continues and exists today?
I think it's still consist. I just think it maybe it presents itself in a different way with the younger generation, but I think it's still there. But I can't really. I'm not a young person. I'm not dealing with a whole lot of young people, so I don't. I can really only speak, I think, for my generation. I don't really see it.
Mhm.
Period. Because if it was if the young people were really getting together, I think we would be seeing a lot of changes, but I don't see any results if it's happening.
Mm.
Uh, so that's why I want, I'm hoping this video gets out there and people will respond, because I would like to know, prove me wrong.
I hope that
There?
that's I hope that that's possible, that there is a change, there is a shift, and it could be demographically, like we were talking about. I mean, I'm in the Midwest, so I don't see much of nothing. I don't see much of nothing. But I mean, that's not to say that the Midwest is closed minded. So I'm not going to say that, because there are, major metropolitan cities in the Midwest. There's Detroit, there's Chicago. There's plenty of major metropolitan cities in the Midwest. But not, I'm not there. So
Okay.
Mhm.
that self-hate is real, and not just in the communities that we reference, but just you know in African American communities, Black communities. There's a thread, I think, of self-hate
Mhm.
that some people have internalized, you know and that's hard to overcome. That's hard to overcome because everything around you says that you're not. Everything that is so not everything. I'll correct that. So much of what you see around you says you should not. You should not like yourself, and you should not like your community. So
Jace, have you asked your husband what he thinks of African Americans and Caribbean Americans?
No, funny, I didn't. The experience I really had was with Caribbean because in France, where I grew up, there's a lot more Caribbean from the French, Caribbean, like Martinique, Guadeloupe, etc., Guyana. So mainly the Caribbean usually did not want to be associated with the Africans. So that created quite a bit of a rip between us. And yes, my opinion of Caribbean, I don't know. I don't know Caribbean very well at all because I was left really with that bitter, you know, taste in the mouth, trying to connect with what I called my brothers and sisters. Because for most African, it's like, if look, you black, You're my brother, you're my sister. Doesn't matter where you come from, because we recognize that all Black people come from Africa. So, and it was very difficult for me to understand why they wouldn't want to be friends, they wouldn't want to associate with me, when I was younger. But the Americans, no, because even myself, before coming to the Exodus movement, I don't know Black American. I didn't know any Black American, right?
But that
So the
doesn't
idea,
mean you didn't have stereotypes about them, though.
no, the
Some people
stereotype is just that they think that they're better than us. It's easy for me to say as an
It's the American stereotype. It's the American stereotype of, that, that elitist stereotype from America,
mm-hmm.
right?
yeah. So no, I will ask him the question, and I think that's a topic that needs to be follow up because it's a sensitive subject, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have limited like information because I've not been close to enough American and Caribbean to really have like apart from the Caribbean, but the French Caribbean. And again, French Caribbean, British Caribbean, it's an all different story, right? So even here, like black from a French speaking country and blacks from an English speaking country, we don't even mix because here, African, I mean, here in my daughter's school, there was like an African from like the English part of Cameroon or South Africa, the one speaking English don't get so much along with the one speaking French. It's very difficult. I tried to be friend with a lady, it did not work. Yep, yep. It's crazy. And I'd like to understand really what's behind that, and what can actually bring us together because this is so silly.
I think we know. Don't we know though what's
I think
behind
we know
it?
where it's
we,
coming from,
but we pretend and we don't know.
No.
The public should tell us in the comments what they think this is coming from because we don't know.
If there is a division between African, Black Americans, and Caribbean,
Divide to conquer.
do we know why that exists? I think we know why that exists. Yeah, I mean, it's a deconstructing, right? I mean, I think that we've done that, right? And most women that have that are part of the Exodus group for certain, and Black women who travel often, have already started the process of deconstructing some of that.
Mhm.
Just
But this is why I believe that there's a change coming. I think a lot more blacks in general, where it doesn't matter where they come from, are coming together. Being on YouTube, there's a lot of people that will come. I don't know, I was talking about something about African or black people issue. And that brown person would come and say, yeah, I understand you. Because the Indian, I mean, wherever you go, there's those people that look like us that are very dark, right?
Yeah.
The brown people. So they may not experience exactly what we're experiencing as being blacks, but
Mhm.
being brown people, they have their own issue where they can kind of can understand a little bit where we are coming from.
Right.
So
yes.
I see like a movement of us working toward coming together, at least a small group of us. Look
If
at
you
us.
can't assimilate
The
to
Indian,
whiteness,
African
like
American,
in the
African.
world, like
Sorry?
my thought is, if you can't assimilate, if it's more difficult to assimilate to whiteness, just in the world, you know, that there's going to be some commonalities, let's say, to being a person of color in this world. If you are not able to
Yeah,
easily assimilate to whiteness,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's going to be some common threads, right? And so deconstructing race, like deconstructing, what it means to be black or brown or a person of color in this world, is something all should be deconstructing, like really like examining, right? And that's not to separate us as humans from, you know, the collective just in general, but it's to kind of unprogram ourselves
But don't you think
from
it's
this
happening?
idea that being a person of color makes you less than.
Hmm. I think it's happening. I've seen that in the French community online, where it doesn't matter where they come from, they come together as one. And there's even a lady called who has a channel called Grandeur Noire on YouTube. She's a Guyanaise, so she's from the Caribbean. She fully embraced the blackness. She's not talking about being black from wherever. She's talking about all the black people together. And she's
Mm-hmm.
really trying to go find where she teach you where it's come from, that hate, the hate that we have between us, and how we should come together, how we should support each other. There's definitely a movement happening, you know. So for me, I'm hopeful that one day will understand and will come together as one, and is getting there slowly but slowly. Yeah, little by
I mean,
little. I
we're
mean,
still like I mean, I know we're talking about African versus African American versus Caribbean, um,
mm-hmm.
but I mean, just in terms of each group in itself, there's so much division, right? There's so much division just in the African American, Black African American. There's so much division, right, in terms of like belief system. You know, you mentioned it. You mentioned something about church and community around church. That your daughter goes to a Black church, right? And that really they centralize about is being Black Christians or being Christian.
Yeah.
There's probably unmelanated people in the congregation too, I'm sure. But
No, no,
oh, okay, well,
and it's
so
not by choice, by the way. They just don't come to the church.
well that's exactly what the point I was going to make is that my husband and I we were out yesterday and there was a building that had all these cars and he pointed out to me, he's like, oh, they're not that's a church that opened up, and God, they're getting a lot of people. And it was like a just like a regular storefront kind of thing, and there was a lot of cars. And I was like, is that a Black church or a white church? And he said that it was a mixed like church, like just a bunch of different, all kinds of people, Black people, white people. But he said it was a white church, and then he was like, well, actually, there's all kinds of people go to it. And then I asked him, I said, but is it Black leadership or is it white leadership? Because when I think of a Black church, I'm thinking Black leadership.
Exactly.
Black
Yeah.
leadership. And what we find often, I don't know if this is going off track, but this is what made me think about in terms of community and groups, is Black people will go to a white-led church, but white people rarely go to a Black-led church, right? So when you see a white-led church, and you see all these different types of people coming to this church, it gives the impression that this is a diverse church and blah, 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 because of the congregation, right? But there's no Black leadership in this
Yeah.
church, right? And then you look on the other hand, white people don't come and join Black churches at the level, in terms of volume, at the level that Black people will go to a white-led church. You know what I mean? So they see them all as Christians, right? But there's still this division. You know, there's still this division even among Black people. You know what I mean? To step outside and engage more than still white people tend to be. Even if they see themselves under the same banner, you know, white Christians. I mean, we can see that everywhere.
Yeah,
But
correct,
Amy, you
guys.
say that's true. That's
I would
probably
imagine in Africa must have all those because well, let me ask you. I'm now doing stereotypes or making assumptions based on no knowledge at all about how the
one
other
of us
different
are.
African countries think of each other than when I was in South Africa talking to the cab drivers and stuff, hearing about the different attitudes between the South Africans, between the people from Zimbabwe, people from Kenya, or people from whatever. So, how do the Africans feel about each other? About Cameroon versus
But there's a big difference anyway between the different countries in Africa. As I was saying, even from the French speaking countries to
countries.
the English speaking countries to the we also have countries that speak like Portuguese, that
Yeah.
speak Spanish, etc. So
And
we
then
come
when
from
you're
the
talking about the North Africans, that's
North Africa, right? Arabic. So, and we take from the colonizer, you will see that a lot that imprint is really upon the population. And that's where there's a bit of division between us because the British, the English speaking countries in Africa have really that British way of doing things, right? Straight to the point. And the French speaking country, are really acting a bit like, the colonizer. So that already makes a difference.
Mm.
Generally, we can all come together, but Africa also is very tribal. There's a lot of like tribes and there's a lot of differences,
Mhm.
right? I don't see big fight, but everybody really, I don't know, it's difficult to answer. Everybody can come together as one, as being African, but there's still a lot of division between us, even within Africa, right? That's what I was telling you. When I go to a country in Africa, I consider myself as African, but you have African that will tell me, but no, you're not from Senegal. I say, yeah, I'm African. So,
Yeah.
so there's still a lot of work to do, even within Africa, where, and don't even go in different country, even in the same
same
country.
country. Yeah.
Cameroon has a part that is like francophone, so French speaking, another one that anglophone,
Mhm.
English speaking. There's been war between them for I don't know how long now, right? So, and even if you go within one tribe, if they speak different dialect, please, humans, like it's ridiculous. There's a lot of work to do to come together as one, and that comes from, like, let's say Cameroon and Gabon. We have a border in the north of Gabon and the south of Cameroon. It's exactly the same family. You have these people passing the border, and they're like, okay, I'm going to see my sister, and they just dress with their bucket on their head with the fruit, and the policeman or the won't stop them because they know you have the same family that during colonization they've been separated in the middle, but it's exactly the same family. Only one is Gabonese, one is French, but they're exactly the same people, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So we have a lot of, I don't know, healing to do. And
Mhm.
what makes me sad today is when we talk about those different diverses between all of us, is today we know better. Yes, we know where all of that stems from, but we know better to those today, so we can't continue blaming. What can we do to change that for ourselves?
Do we know
Right?
better?
And we should. We should.
Listen, I come from the Midwest. I'm gonna say that one more time. I know that, and I'm not. I don't want to stereotype the Midwest. I really don't. But and I'm not. Like I said, this is a very diverse country, but there are regions in this country that are very isolated. They're not seeking Google. They're very they're not Googling. Okay? They are their idea of people is shaped by the people around them in their communities, and their families. And so there's a fixed mindset. And I think that goes to the stereotype, right? Because I looked it up, Amy.
Okay.
That's what it says, a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. right? Well, you exposure is what is the antidote to stereotype. Exposure, or and you don't allow yourself to be exposed. How does it change? You see what I'm saying?
But the problem is just think
My
of
sound is really
yourself.
good, guys.
Being exposed and knowing something is only a small fact of something. You have to, just like I know I shouldn't be eating X, Y, and Z or doing, I should be exercising all this other stuff. But that doesn't, I know perfectly well, and almost everybody I think knows what they're supposed to be eating and doing, but we ain't doing it.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah.
So,
but you're still saying that it
human.
starts with the knowing, though. But you're still saying that it
but
starts
to
with
me,
the
the knowing, yes, it starts with the knowing, but unfortunately, I don't know. I wish what's beyond knowing, because I don't know. Yes, knowing, yeah, but then knowing, we know a lot of stuff, but we still don't execute on that. So
well, that's true. I mean, so what you're saying essentially is that there are people that do know, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then this, but see, this is the thing, though. There's a difference between knowing and believing, right? When you have an ideology, it's a fixed belief system, right? Like I might know, for example, intellectually, I might know that it's harmful, to be you may know, say, and I don't even want to hear about people's opinion on this, because I don't it's not a, let's say that it's harmful to physically beat your children. That, like, intellectually is everywhere, right? But you may have a cultural belief, okay, a belief that prevents you from acting on what you know intellectually to be true, maybe by research, or maybe it's just cleaning your chicken. Maybe the black people love to clean. They clean their meat good, right? Because their grandparents clean their meat, but it may be in the modern age that when you get your meat, you don't have to clean it to that degree, because it's not coming from a farm. You're not plucking the feathers. You know what I mean? Like, it goes through a process, and then whatever is on the chicken, it dies anyway, if there is anything else. You know what I mean? Like, there might be things that intellectually or have learned, right? But then there's a belief system that you have to deconstruct, right? There's a belief system and that's the hardest piece, I think, because when you deconstruct those pieces,
but that still doesn't mean you're going to do
it. You're not. It doesn't mean in most cases it means you're not going to do it, because if it's a belief system, right, then you have to not only deconstruct the intellectual piece, but you have to look at your whole family culture. That's where people won't let it go, because you have to look at what you were taught by your parents and your grandparents and your culture and your school and your, you know what I mean, and your church and all those things. And that's what's really difficult. It's not just, like you said, the knowing. The knowing is the one piece, but then there's a belief part, the ideology part, where people, I think, get stuck. And if you're from a community or a region that's limited, there's not much diversity, there's not many languages, there's not exposure, then it makes it even more difficult. It makes it even harder, I think, to deconstruct beliefs, right? Because you're so entrenched in it. It's so entrenched in your identity.
Right. What do you think
Have there been
about?
things that you've had to deconstruct in terms of your belief systems that aren't true? You know what I mean? That aren't true in terms of knowledge, but you grew up believing those things to be true, right? And in order to deconstruct that, you had to kind of examine things about your family or your community or whatever.
Yeah, but like I was saying before, but I don't know whether I hear what you're saying, but I think you can deconstruct that, realize whatever, and still not change your actions. I don't know what the answer
Mm,
is for the changing of the action. Because even with the beliefs, I don't know, a lot of these things, forms of discrimination I'll use for example, at the end of the day, I don't know whether those people really believe what they're saying, but it's benefiting them for whatever. So I think it's
mm,
sometimes hard to tell if you fool yourself or whatever. So I don't know. Sometimes I think those things are interconnected, and I don't know whether these people that spout out those things, I don't know if they really actually even believe it
Okay.
themselves. But for any number of reasons,
there's a benefit. So
it's
there's a
benefiting
benefit.
them at some. I mean, if
Yeah.
it's benefiting you, you know,
Mm, mm.
most people are going to operate on things that benefit them.
Oh
Mhm.
my. Ah, I think you have a point there. There's a reward in some on some level
Some of these, so
to,
how,
to, to hold on to some of that stuff.
you can't get into your head. I think you can only speak for yourself, and sometimes for yourself, you don't even know what the hell's going on.
That's so
Okay,
true.
okay, guys.
It's so
You
true.
know, we were talking about the stereotype and what, we've seen happening all around us. But, changes start with ourselves, right? So,
Yes.
do you yourself feel connected in, you know, any way to the other blacks? Or do you yourself feel that separation toward the other blacks? Are we also adding to the problem, or are we? No, like seriously, because we're talking about other people. What about ourselves?
I'm
Oh
laughing.
my
I'm
God.
laughing because since since the pandemic, I haven't been associating with anybody.
Is that your excuse?
Oh my God. This is
But
oh
no,
no.
but I
That's an
think I've
interesting question.
always, but I think I'm weird in that way. I've always been kind of interested in the others. So I always made an effort, even with the whatever, them not thinking, oh, he's a stupid American or whatever they had, whatever the Africans or the
People
Caribbeans
don't think
thought
that. I
about.
don't know.
No,
We don't
I
think
don't know.
that.
My experience, like I said, in college, I went to my first year, I went to all black college. I'm not going to name it. And, I had a lot of exposures to African and people from the Caribbean. And I felt some superiority from
Really?
them, yes.
Wow.
But I didn't care. I still sought out blacks from other, but like I said, I told you I came from a family that was very heavy in that pan African, that kind of thing. So that probably, so I've been growing up with that since a child. So I kind of fought against that. But I did feel, yes, from, because whatever now this may be another dynamic too, that could be a gender thing too, because I'm thinking of the Africans that I dealt with in college, that I got, they were men, not women, which that could be,
Mm.
that could be something.
That could be another. Yes.
Another discussion. Now that I
Yeah.
think about it, on both sides, now that I'm thinking about it, but that's probably another discussion for another time, gender things. But
Oh my God.
But I mean, I can't say that the fact that we all three sitting here and we friend tells a lot about where we sit on that subject, don't you think?
mm-hmm.
We wouldn't have connected if, um, yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
I think that what was the question?
I don't remember.
No, she said, are we contributing to the problem? Where do we stand on the stereotypes?
I
Are
mean,
we making an effort to
Ah,
sticking with our identity?
I don't think I I'm like Amy. I kind of break through those stereotypes. I try to break through those.
yeah.
I recognize them, I see them, but I try to just break through those and I think recognizing them is the first step. I recognize they for what they are, right?
And
And
where
so
they
I can
come
easily
from.
kind of knock those dominoes down. But if I had a stereotype within the culture, it would be in terms of class. It would be in terms like my most difficult or challenging interactions or with Black people in in were in lines of class, like class within the Black community, middle class and affluent versus everybody else. So that's where I've probably come rubbed up against. I've had from friction, and maybe I do have some stereotypes in terms of those things in terms of class. We
Well,
don't talk a lot about class in the Black culture, but it's clearly present.
but we didn't even really talk about class, but
Yeah,
actually,
class. Yeah, that's another thing. But
But
that
it,
but that
be an
but
element in
if I had a stereotype, I'm just saying if there was something that within the Black community, right? Whether it was across, whether it was just within the Black African American community or across all, you know, um, groups that we were talking about today, if I had a stereotype that was challenging for me to knock down, it would be in the realm of class, right? And so, yeah, I may have a stereotype in terms of how I feel about upper middle class Black people, as opposed to how I feel about, working class or low income people.
yeah,
That
black
that that
people.
would be where I can see that I might have some issues and things that I need to work on there.
Well,
Okay.
we didn't discuss that here, but that probably even comes into this African versus African American versus Caribbean. Because, for
Really?
example, talking about college, the Africans that you're dealing with in a college situation is of a certain class, which is probably
I see where you're coming from now.
an elite.
Yes.
It's not a working or working poor African that I'm running into in whatever university, or even the Caribbean too. So that's, we didn't talk
You
about that, but
you
that's
yeah, Amy, you're touching in something that I did not take into account earlier.
mhm.
These same black elitists that you're talking about, they're like that even with the black or the black
Mhm.
that also African people. They're usually kids from like
Mhm.
government people that have money in Africa,
Right.
right? That send their kids in those schools. So they
Mhm.
already think of themselves as better than whoever.
We're gonna get ourselves in some trouble.
I know.
All these Black middle class people, like,
You gotta watch, because don't you have another channel, James?
Yeah, we're gonna be killed here with this. But it's true. A lot of these kids are like they come from such a rich,
Yeah, it's a
parent,
political class,
political. Yes,
or
yeah, they're kids
industrial.
of like ministers and kids of. We know them because
oh
even when
Lord.
they come, they are like that with everyone else.
So
It's not
maybe,
because
Oh,
you are
yeah,
African American. They just think that they're better than because their dad is the prime minister or the whatever,
yeah.
right?
So we're not
These
maybe,
are they have their own class.
yeah. So we're not taught.
They-
So we're not. Yeah.
wow.
oh my
I mean,
God.
yeah. We
These
didn't even discuss that, but that explains.
Oh my
That
God.
explains some of what we're talking about.
exactly, guys. Do you really think that there's? I mean, there's definitely is, but like, what are the differences that we have, like African versus African American versus Caribbean? What are the the noticeable differences between us, apart from culture, apart from traditions? For me, I can't. Sometimes it really depends on how they look. It's difficult for me to go on the street and see black people and say, "Oh, that's a Caribbean. Oh, that's an African American. Oh, that's an African." I see a black person. Do you have something that really like point you?
Um, I don't know. I'd have to think about that, but I'm pretty good at that. But I'm good at that with a lot of different. Like I can tell even within, we'll say the Caucasian people. I can when I see them in the street, I can say, "Oh, that one is not American. That one's coming from Germany." Or,
Oh, okay.
I
but
think that that comes with being with like you coming
Being
from
exposed like you
exposed to
are.
a lot
Yeah,
of different types of people.
yeah, yeah,
um, but to say what it is, I don't know.
yeah. And culturally, because I'm thinking what Tiffany was saying at the beginning, that the tradition and the culture could be something that also keep us apart. Maybe we're not following the same,
Well,
you
one
know.
thing, yeah, one thing I don't know how to explain it or even put it in words, but I think one of the if you want to put positive stereotypes that I pick up from Africans and people from the Caribbean is when it comes to like politics and being involved in politics and seeing political figures. Now I'm just rambling, and I think that's because the racism that took the form in this country, we didn't really have for a long time black politicians. But even in the Caribbean, with all the whatever they had slavery and other stuff in the Caribbean still had black leaders. Now they may have been corrupt or whatever else was going on, or puppets or whatever, but they had black prime ministers, things like that that we didn't really have here in the US, and the same thing with Africa. So I feel like I don't know what it is. So there's some sort of, am I making any kind of sense?
No, no, you making
I
total sense.
don't know how to put it in words, but something that African Americans are still sort of grappling with having political power.
It's a higher climb in African for African Americans in the States. Like it's a higher climb, as like you were saying, than it is for because they can see themselves. They so used to seeing themselves
Yeah.
in these roles that it's less of a leap.
Right, right. Because a lot of those countries, they had a lot more black businesses, they had black doctors, they had black whatever that we didn't necessarily have to that extent here. So I think so that's caused some sort of something. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's just I don't know. I don't know. There's a level of terror here in the States. There's a level of terror, in the States when I mean there's trauma. You know what I mean? There's a trauma, that, black African Americans hold, in our lineage. You know what I mean? There's a trauma that there's a terror, you know what I mean, that I think exists like collectively. You know what I mean?
That's everywhere. That's all the blacks have that trauma. You did the
Mhm,
Caribbean the same. They're
Mm-hmm.
also descendant of slave coming from
Mm-hmm.
Africa. Africa have been colonized and not independent until the
Right.
60s, 1960s.
Yeah.
So they were enslaved on their own continent. They
Right.
were not free. So we have that collective,
like
as
the
you say,
trauma, yeah.
trauma, where I think that should be enough to help us
unite
bond
us,
together,
right?
unite us, So I've
unless
never,
unless like Amy said, there's a reward for being
of
for not
course,
unite. I mean,
yes,
like what she said, I
yes,
think there's some validity to that. Like
yeah, definitely,
if
yeah,
there's some reward or some kind of
Hmm.
benefit
Or
of
even if it's a
disconnecting
perceived
from,
one.
but yeah,
even if you can um actualize, you can like access, like you can
Hmm.
access the things that you know other groups can access, right? You can move into the neighborhood, if you can drive the car, if you can go to the school, if you can have the job title, if you can, you know what I mean,
mm-hmm,
then somehow you can separate yourself
mm,
from the rest of the culture.
mm-hmm,
Did you guys ever see? It was a interview. I should see if I can find it. It was Toni Morrison, and she was talking about. Well, she was talking about discrimination, but she was talking about, particularly here in the U.S., on how the one united thing coming here, but she was really talking about these different whites. So she says, all these white people that come from other parts of the world where they weren't even considered white wherever they came from. But once they came here in the US, the one united thing was to be against, that's how you knew made yourself an American. You were against, discriminate against the Black person. That's what made you, but she said it much more eloquently, but that was basically it. All these, I don't know whether she called out different groups like Italians or whatever, but she said, these different white people, and they weren't white wherever they came from, but when they came here, their
Mhm.
unifying thing was to be, okay, we're going to be, those Black people over there. And so I feel like kind of that's in some
That's
sense where
um
some of these other Blacks from other places come here. I think they've kind of folded into that thing where it's okay,
there's a
I'm
book
not
to
Black.
your point. There's a few books, but to your point, Amy, there's a book that I read called Working Toward Whiteness. Um, and I just pulled it up on here because I don't have it with me. I think I let somebody borrow it actually. How America's Immigrants Became White.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a really good book about that, and the basically the desire or the benefit of assimilation to whiteness in America. Um, yeah, so even though there's some blacks that obviously can't assimilate to whiteness, but they can assimilate to a certain class, right? They can align themselves within a certain class that gives them similar benefits. Um, and I guess I that's those are things that I have to unpack as in terms of classism, because I see it so starkly in the Midwest, uh and it's just it's incredible. But yeah.
Well, I
all
don't know.
right.
You were all over the place, so you got a
All
whole
right, all
other
right, all right. I feel like that conversation need like hours and more to,
Mhm.
there's so much to say that it's like it's an unfinished conversation,
Mhm.
you know? So yeah, definitely I'm very curious to know what the audience, the viewer will think about, and please do share in the comments, let's continue the conversation in the comments. I'm very curious to know because as we said, we're not here as what we say is what it is. We're just sharing our own experience, right?
And
So
we're curious too. Like
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
curious about, because we know that like our experience is that of one, and an individual experience. And I'm curious about, particularly for someone who isn't around much diversity, what people have to say. I appreciate just the both of you having been exposed to so many different cultures and ethnicities, your take on it, because I think that it was valuable. I really think it was valuable. Um, yeah. So
yeah.
And
There's
I
something. Go on, Amy.
I
Go
was
in.
gonna say, and I'd like to any young people out there, when I say young, let's say under 35, what do you guys think? What do you identify as?
Mhm.
And do you think there's differences? Do you have stereotypes? What are the stereotypes? Please comment.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And you would
Um,
think, I mean, just thinking about differences, there's just got to be differences, right? Because
there
there's
is differences.
there's always differences,
Mhm.
right? Because there's differences between the three of us, right? There are differences between people in our own families, so
Mhm.
the differences exist, but like, what are the differences,
Yeah.
and how do the differences um create a better society, or make our worlds worse, or our experiences worse or better, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or I'm just curious if people do have a variety of friends, because honestly, a lot of people don't have a variety of friends. They have friends or people they associate that are just like them.
Yeah.
So,
They're not exposed to different cultures. So, yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that was me, coming up in a pretty, I mean, in that I had to seek out people who came from diverse backgrounds, seek it out, because it was pretty like white and black, so yeah. And
Okay.
black in terms of like garden variety American, like great
working.
migration, garden variety black person in America. So yeah, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to different, groups of
It
black.
is true though. What have also made me realize that because we're so compartmentalized, like, we stay in our own groups, we don't really mix, so we don't really know each other. That's where those stereotypes comes also, right?
Yes,
I wonder
yes,
if we come together, share meals, and get to know each other, what would happen? Right?
Mhm.
Because we tend to like click where we're comfortable. And I've seen that, by the way. Exodus, yes, we clicked, and that's why we're friends today. But often when I was in a big group, I don't understand whatever you're talking about most of the time, a lot of the time. Like, I support my sisters in Exodus Summers and I go in those live.
Mhm.
But a lot of the time, American talks about Americans,
yeah,
talks about what's happening in America, which is totally normal.
yeah,
But I'm there because I'm supporting a sister, because I want to be in the community with like-minded people, because we all around traveling and living our best life, right? That's where I connect with you guys. The fact that we are 50 years old, we black women. When I saw the first video of Stephanie Perry, and again the Exodus, what I'm interested in is travel, this
Mhm.
traveling aspect.
yes.
That's my passion.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I gravitate around people looking like me. That's traveling.
Travel.
That's the core uh you know the core thing that I'm in for why I'm in that group. But now I know that when we in groups and there's American and I'm there, often I'm lost in the conversation. I'm listening in, but I don't get the jokes. I don't get.
Mhm.
Earlier you were laughing about something. I have no idea what that is about, right?
Oh, you should have said something.
No, it's okay because I sometimes I can just have a reference of what it is without maybe understand it, but I get what it is.
You get
It's
the
just not my
context.
yes, it's just not my culture, right? So I'm just wondering if that's what of the reason why a lot of people don't even try coming together because of the small differences that we are. But I'm somebody that's very open, right? I'm willing to take what's positive in a relationship and the rest is not important, right? So maybe that's why there's not enough African maybe in Exodus Summit. At some point I felt really left out as well,
Why do you feel left out?
because like even the thematic, like the 401k, the reference are
Okay.
typically American,
Mhm.
right? It doesn't touch me. It has nothing to do with my life
Right.
or what I live. So I can't really relate to anything. Even the advice that are given are
Mhm.
for American, right? Leave the America today because of this and that. I'm not American, and I'm not even trying to live anywhere, right? I'm just a traveler.
Mhm.
So, but for me, it goes beyond that. I see Black women, yes, I'm not American. That's a reference about you because this is normal, because that's your life. That's what you
Yeah.
know. So you're talking about what you know. If I'm with African people, I will do the same thing. And even when I exchange with you, my reference will be African. I will be like, okay, Africa's this, Africa that, because that's what I know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So an African lady coming maybe in the group might feel like, if she doesn't have like, didn't, was not exposed enough to, different Black people coming from all over, a typical African people might be very like phased, like, I don't understand these people, I can't really get along with them. I'm wondering if it's that more than just being hateful against each other. I don't know.
Well, I think what you said you're making an important point. That's kind of what I was alluding to earlier about the nuances in the cultures and that kind of separate us. I think the challenge is I don't I think the difference really is maybe not the challenge, but the difference is that we can appreciate the nuances of our culture without using that as a way to be divisive. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like to
Yeah.
divide us from being Black people. You know what I mean?
Yes. Exactly.
And I think sometimes that's the challenge is like, this is my culture, these are my beliefs, these are my traditions, these are my customs, you know what I mean? And therefore I'm not like you, right? I think you can have both. I think you can have, a sense of community and respect for your culture, right? And still embrace being a Black person, like
Right.
holistically.
Definitely. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think we recognize that. I just don't know if all